Hello guys and welcome back to the Popcorn Podcast. My name is Dylan, of course, and if you haven't noticed already, this video is going to primarily be dedicated to my experience with Breaking Bad. Now, I've had my fair share of people, family, friends come up to me and say, "Oh my god, you haven't seen Breaking Bad." I don't know what that was, I apologize. But yeah, since completing the show, I can definitely see why all those comments are justified, because in today's video, I'm essentially going to be taking you guys through my reasoning for why I think Breaking Bad is definitely one of the best shows I've ever seen. So I'm going to be highlighting some of the reasons as to why I think the show is so great, some of my favorite characters, some of my favorite moments. And now looking back on it, I am kind of ashamed that being a lover of cinema, it has taken me this long to finally get around to watching the show. But at the same time, I'm really happy that I watched it on my own terms, and I have of course finally completed it. Just very quickly though, before we do get into the video, make sure if you love movies, TV shows, cinema in general, you are subscribed to the Popcorn Podcast. It will help me out a lot. If not, no worries. But without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Okay, so one of the reasons why the show works so well, in my opinion, and ended in such a perfect way, was this incredible vision of everyone behind the camera. I mean, yes, if the first season hadn't performed well, the show probably would have been axed and we would have never had 5 seasons of extraordinary television. But prior to the massive success of the show, I'm pretty certain that Vince Gilligan and the showrunners behind Breaking Bad, when they started, must have known more or less where they would finish. So having that end goal and having that vision has definitely helped in telling this incredibly fascinating yet thoroughly engaging story of how Mr. Chips could turn into Scarface, all whilst exploring realistic themes and of course the ultimate question: what does it truly take for someone to break bad?
Run.
In addition, one of the things amongst others that I love about the show is that despite the story being very calculated and very specific, it still has room for those ambitious, jaw-dropping set pieces that truly make for great cinema. The characters are all heading towards the end of their arcs, but not without the time or flexibility to create truly epic moments, which I will get onto later in the video. But yeah, it's these larger-than-life moments combined with the aspects of a family drama that give Breaking Bad a sense of both realism and escapism. And it's this beautiful blend between the two that has set the bar so very high, not just for TV shows, but for great storytelling in general. Now, is Breaking Bad the most beautiful show of all time? Probably not. But in the context of the story, I think the visual aesthetic of the show is just marvelous. The cinematography of the show really effectively complements both the writing and the performances. For a story that is a lot of the time very gritty and spends significant time exploring the ugly side of humanity, Breaking Bad surprisingly has such a dynamic color palette, with its visuals ranging from dark and gloomy to bright and vibrant, and it does this all whilst realistically embracing the moment and the character's state of mind. I also found that the cinematography became more inventive as the show went on. Slower and more ordinary moments, say for example conversations between two characters, no longer had the chance of feeling less engaging or, dare I say, boring, because of the way in which the camera movements are held. Now, some people might not actually care about those technical aspects. You know, if the story and the characters are solid, that's good enough for them. But for me, I really do appreciate when anything of a film medium, whether it be TV shows, films, music videos, actually implement innovative visual direction into their production, because it shows that the people behind the camera actually care about what they are making. You know, it gives me confidence when I watch new material, because I know that the filmmakers are very much prioritizing viewing experience, and at the end of the day, you know that they're on your side. Also, very quickly before we do move on, does anyone else really love it whenever scenes in Breaking Bad are broken into these beautiful time lapses? Like this, for example. I mean, I know it might seem like quite a cliched tool to use in film, but honestly, I couldn't care. I could spend a whole day just watching compilations of these, because they're just amazing.
Ready or not.
I'm going to try my best not to waste any time talking in depth about specifics for some characters, but let me just start off this section by saying everyone, and I mean everyone, brings their A game when it comes to performances. In the entire 62 episodes of Breaking Bad, at not one moment did I think anyone in the slightest was giving an unconvincing performance.
However, that being said, I definitely think that some arcs were a lot more fulfilling than others. Throughout the show's runtime, Skylar and Marie quickly became two of the most, I don't want to say annoying, but frustrating characters I think I've ever seen in a show before. For the majority of the time, I really didn't like them guys. But at the same time, I did understand why they were necessary to the show. Both of them are wives who had very little control over their headstrong husbands, and in that respect, at certain points, they both kind of came across weak. I mean, this definitely applies to Skylar more than Marie, because at least Marie actually attempts to help Hank a lot of the time, and is more or less on his side. Whereas Skylar, despite becoming more involved in Walt's schemes, still opposes him. And not to mention the fact that she f***ed Ted. Oh my god. When that happened, I couldn't believe it. I wanted to throw something at the TV.
Speaking of Ted, even though I despised his character, I can't be all mad because he gave me one of the most hilarious on-screen moments of Breaking Bad. So I think that's the majority of characters that I didn't really like on the show, but now on to the villains.
In a show that mainly focuses on how its main character develops into a criminal mastermind, I mean, the villains of Breaking Bad had to be something really special to add even more conflict and tension to a story that was ripe with both. So here are my overall thoughts on the villains of Breaking Bad. Who remembers Crazy 8 from season 1? Boy, was he stupid for thinking he could manipulate Walt into letting him go. Tuco Salamanca, well, he was, how should I put this?
An insane, degenerate piece of filth.
Hector Salamanca, I mean, he's the same as Tuco, I guess, but I will say that he very much came in clutch when it mattered. I mean, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? These guys were, I guess, a good physical threat, but aside from that, I did think that they were a bit, like, just meh. Lydia in season 5 was just so calculating. I mean, she really tried to orchestrate everything, but I mean, come on, you can't mess with Heisenberg and get away with it. Todd, well, Todd, I hated him. He was an unbearable character, and him and his Uncle Jack and his gang too. They all deserved what happened to them in the end, and boy was it satisfying. Now, probably the best villain on the whole show was Gustavo Fring, played excellently by Giancarlo Esposito, who was easily one of my favorite characters to watch. What an antagonist. Even his henchmen got under my skin. Gus was so relentless and just terrifying. You honestly did not know if in a scene the guy was going to offer you dinner at his house or slit your throat. This mysterious criminal mastermind who was pretty much a chameleon, blending in with society, but at the same time influencing everything behind the scenes. I actually think that he's a good example of the kind of character status that Walter might have been like if things didn't go completely south towards the end of the show. Now, just before we get on to the main roles, a brief mention of these fantastic supporting characters. Walter White Jr., yes, I refuse to call him Flynn. Probably the most innocent character in the whole show, he gave Breaking Bad some really touching moments, and in the end, I couldn't help but feel somewhat sad for how things between him and his father ended. Saul Goodman was a great addition to the show in, I think season 2 was it? I can't really remember, but yeah, he was just hilarious and very much a catalyst for the show to become consistently more interesting because of his long list of connections. Even though on many occasions he became a target for Walt and Jesse's rage, I could never truly be angry with Saul myself just because of how likable his character was and how great Bob Odenkirk plays him. After finishing the show, I definitely wish I had a Saul Goodman in my life to help me out, and I'm definitely looking forward to watching Better Call Saul in the near future. Mike Ehrmantraut, Mike. Yeah, Mike was awesome. A no-nonsense, no-prisoners type guy who gave us some of the show's most epic moments. But he's not just this hardened guy, he's more than just the muscle of the show. He has a softer side to him as well. I actually think he's a lot like Walter in the sense that his core motivation resides with providing a good future for his family. However, even though I really loved Mike as a character on the show, unfortunately I did find his end to be kinda disappointing. Hank Schrader. I don't know about you guys, but for me, Hank was instantly likable from season 1. His character was the perfect mix of warm and funny, but also very serious and self-motivated. His arc on Breaking Bad was a beautiful counterbalance to Walt and Jesse's, and through his character, we were allowed to really see that fine line between both sides of the law. At some moments of the show, I was actually rooting for Hank more than I was rooting for Walt. He was, for the most part, one step behind his brother-in-law, but always maintained his fighting spirit in the face of adversity. In the end, he definitely deserved better than just to be killed out there in the desert, but it was a great focal moment to symbolize just how out of hands things had gotten. In the end, it was Hank's hunger for justice that was his downfall, and he is the perfect example of a tragic hero. Now moving on to the main two characters of the show. First up, we have Jesse Pinkman. Like Hank, I think Jesse is easily one of the funniest characters on the show.
Finally, about damn time.
I mean, can you imagine Breaking Bad without the classic
Bitch!
or
Yo.
because I definitely can't. Some of his interactions with Walt, especially in the earlier seasons, were just hilarious, and I could find myself in stitches whenever those comical moments took place.
You're sweating me over $1,000?
Hey, look, I'm just the chemist here. I'm not the street guy, yo.
A high school chemistry teacher and an addict. Who would have thought it? The bond that Jesse and Walt have is more than just two unlikely people coming together, but it's this compelling relationship that constantly moves back and forth. At some moments we experience a heartwarming friendship developing, but at other moments it's complete and utter chaos between the two. But I definitely think these two extremes enhance each other. You know, without these beautiful moments in the show, these moments here wouldn't feel anywhere near as impactful. I think Jesse is one of, if not the most emotionally resonant character on the show. His sensitivity is a result of him constantly being knocked down by society and the others around him, and because of the horrible things that he has to go through, I definitely sympathize with him the most. Even though I'm not a recreational drug user myself, I can't deny that Jesse's ongoing battle against addiction was such a powerful story element of the show, and one that I've really found myself giving a shit for. With the incredible performance that Aaron Paul delivers and the additional help of the Breaking Bad movie El Camino, Jesse Pinkman's story was one that gave me absolutely everything I could ask for as a viewer. Humor, pain, love, friendship, danger, conflict, hope, and by the end of it, complete satisfaction. Okay guys, it took a while, but we finally made it to Heisenberg himself. The tragedy of Walter White is, I think, one of the greatest downturns in film or television history. One that stands proudly alongside the likes of Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars, Jack Torrance from The Shining, Gollum from Lord of the Rings, Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight, Magneto from the X-Men. Yeah, you get the point. A lot of people who I've spoken to about the show talk about how Walter transformed from more or less a good person to a bad person. I think if you are one of these people, you're only seeing half the picture. Yes, Walt does commit terrible acts of wrong, and there's a lot of external factors that influence his decisions, but it's not as simple as a person just going from one end of the spectrum to another. It's more to do with the idea of bringing forth those dark characteristics and tendencies that we all have inside of us. Here's the thing. I don't think that Walter was ever just a good person. It was never that black and white. He'd buried all that frustration, all that rage and pain inside of him. And when he does what he does best throughout the course of the show, how should I put this?
I was alive.
That to me is the most captivating aspect of Breaking Bad as a show. Walter White is a man that is slowly dying as a result of having lung cancer. So when he is in charge, when he is in control of his life, when he is putting his talents to use, cooking meth, making money, that is the only time when he truly feels alive. So with that in mind, I don't think we ever get to really see when Heisenberg was born, because I think Heisenberg was always there. Now I could talk for hours about this, but bringing this magnetic and intense exuberance to the role, Bryan Cranston, I think, has made himself into a living acting legend with his performance as Walter White. I can't imagine anyone on the planet other than him who could play this iconic role now that I've seen the show. If you don't believe me on how great his performance is, if you don't agree with me, ask the great Anthony Hopkins, who by the way said that Cranston's performance as Walter White was the best acting he had ever seen. I mean, to get that kind of praise from Hannibal Lecter himself is just mind-blowing.
You got me.
But you don't need me or him to tell you how good Bryan Cranston is in Breaking Bad. To put it simply, without him, the show completely falls apart.
I won.
Just before we wrap things up, I can't not talk about the moments from Breaking Bad that took me on an absolute roller coaster of emotions. So here is a quick fire of some of my favorite moments from the show.
This was a great start to the show. This was satisfying. This was awesome. Walter using fulminated mercury, what a badass. Seeing Walt and Jesse team up like this against Tuco was amazing. Jeez, Hank is a badass. Welcome Saul Goodman. This was intense. This was one of my favorite episodes of the whole show. Yes, Walt is a badass. I felt both sad and relieved here. This was crazy because if you think about it, Walt was the one who could have stopped this from ever happening. This was kinda cool. Mike is awesome. This was a close call. This episode gets a lot of hate, but I really enjoyed it. This was hilarious. This was nail-biting and Hank is a badass. This was shocking. This was terrifying. This was even more terrifying. This was iconic. This was crazy. This was one of my favorite scenes in the whole show. Bryan Cranston is amazing. This was sad. This was so satisfying. This was insane. This was, I think, the only moment for me that wasn't really that realistic, but still, it was so brilliant how Gus got outsmarted. This was shockingly genius. Walt didn't just fool Jesse, he fooled us all. This was great, just like old times. This was just incredible, and holy shit, Walt is a badass.
You're goddamn right.
This was one of my favorite set pieces of the show. This was sad, fuck Todd. This was iconic. This was disappointing. This was the biggest oh shit moment on the show. This was super intense. This was shocking. This was sadly inevitable. This was upsetting. This was heartbreaking. I actually cried. This was sad. This was also very sad. This was fantastic. This was fucking amazing. I've said multiple times, Walter White is a fucking badass. This was perfect.
The original premise of Breaking Bad was a high school chemistry teacher who teams up with an addict to cook crystal meth in order to pay for lung cancer treatments. But by the end of the show, we know it's so much more than that. And it's that commitment to the original vision that makes Breaking Bad one of the most fulfilling shows of television of all time.
Guys, there's no other way to describe the ending of the show other than the word perfect. At least perfect in the context of the show. Not in the sense that everyone lives happily ever after, but that it stayed true and logical to the realism of the show's realm, as well as the heart of these amazing characters. In that final shot when Walt was lying there dying on the ground, there was a hint of sadness in my heart because buried in all the bad, there is a good man, a loving father and a friend. But that doesn't mean I wasn't satisfied. I mean, at the end of the day, this was a man who began to live his life on his own terms and died on his own terms. And that, I think, was Walter White's greatest accomplishment. And it's ironic that even when he's taking his final breaths, lying on the floor of a meth lab, Walter White felt more alive than ever before.
So yeah, those are pretty much my overall thoughts on Breaking Bad now that I have seen the show. It has been one hell of a ride and I've loved every single minute of it. I honestly don't know how I've only got around to watching it in 2020, but I'm glad that I finally experienced it. I will take away a lot of things from this show and I suspect that this is not the first and only time that I will be watching it. Guys, if you are a fan of Breaking Bad and you did enjoy the video, please go ahead and leave a like and leave your thoughts on the show down below in the comments section. I would love to know what you think as well. Also, if you are a fan of movies, TV shows, film, cinema in general, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button on the Popcorn Podcast channel to get on board. And yeah, you're gonna make my day if you do that, so please go ahead and do so. Also, let me know what films or TV shows you'd like me to make a video on next time. I'm happy to take suggestions. But for now, thank you so much for watching the video, guys, and I'll catch you in the very next.